House should end the shutdown. Just vote on the Senate-passed continuing resolution. After all, it has the numbers they in the House asked for. All they have to do is keep their word. We in the Senate did. Now it's time for them to. Mr. President, I see no one else seeking recognition. I suggest the absent quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President, I would ask suspension of the quorum call.
Without objection. The senator from Michigan.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, there are two issues wrapped together right now that are causing dire consequences for people all across the country. The first, as we know and as we have been debating here, is the government shutdown and all that is happening in terms of people being hurt, jobs being lost, small businesses not being able to get the loans they need, people not being able to complete their mortgage requirements to get the homes that they want, the concerns about health and safety and all of the other issues, children, what's happening to so many people, senior citizens, veterans, and so on. Very, very serious. And this is the 11th day of the government shutdown that's costing us jobs, slowing the economy, and hurting families all across the country. It's an absolute drag on the economy, in our markets, and on, frankly, America's standing in the world, which we should all be concerned about right now. It's frankly an embarrassment that in the greatest country in the world, our government is shut down while a small minority tries to score political points. And unfortunately, that's what's been happening. The second issue is also very, very important, and that is the lapse of a farm bill, agricultural and food policy bill, in this country. The farm bill has actually been expired for 376 days. 376 days, because it ended in September of 2012, September 30th. And then in last January, there was a partial extension that extended subsidies that we all said should be eliminated, did not include reforms, did not include deficit reduction, but there was a partial extension until this September 30th, and that has also lapsed. And I know the distinguished chair of the Senate now, who's a member of my committee and from Indiana and fights very hard for farmers in Indiana, and I'm grateful that you're a member of our committee, Mr. President. I know that you understand and share my tremendous sense of concern and urgency, both about the government shutdown and about that we are seeing agricultural programs, rural economic development being shut down because we don't have a farm bill. Nowhere is this felt more strongly right now than in South Dakota. I'm not from South Dakota, the presiding officer is not from South Dakota, but we have colleagues here who have been on the floor. I have talked to the senators from South Dakota about this, I know, who are deeply concerned, as well as the senators from North Dakota. But in South Dakota, where last Friday, October 4th, an early autumn blizzard killed an estimated 75,000 head of cattle. 75,000 head of cattle. And just one of the many pictures of what is happening as a result of this blizzard. Many producers lost half their entire herd. Keep in mind that many thousands of these cows would have produced calves in the spring. So these are losses that are huge for ranchers and families and will be felt for many, many years to come. These cattle ranchers and their families have no safety net, zero safety net. They don't get direct payment subsidies. They have right now zero safety net. They only had livestock disaster programs which expired October 1 of 2011, 741 days ago. Their losses are expected to reach into the tens of millions of dollars. Our farm bill, our Senate farm bill, which we passed, as we know, with strong bipartisan majorities last year and this year, we've actually done it twice doing our jobs, includes permanent livestock disaster assistance for these ranchers and these families, to make sure that ranchers like those in South Dakota don't go bankrupt, which is what is going to happen right now if we don't get this farm bill in place as soon as possible. But there is no farm bill, and even if there were, those farmers wouldn't be able to get help because the farmers can't document their losses and get the answers they need from the farm service agencies because they're part of the shutdown. So these ranchers, like many farmers across the country, are getting the 1-2 punch, not being able to go to their local FSA office to get the help they need, and at the same time not having the long-term certainty of agricultural policy and a safety net needed when there's a catastrophe. Three things have come together to make this a major disaster for these ranchers. The need for a farm bill with livestock disaster assistance, which we have. We have a great livestock disaster assistance program in our bill. The good news is the House has one as well. If we can get a farm bill done, which could be done any day now, we're willing to be a part of any agreement that anyone comes up with, do this any way we can, we will be able to help those South Dakota ranchers. So of the three things, one is that we don't yet have a final farm bill, even though the United States Senate on a bipartisan basis, has done its job twice. Secondly, we have a government shutdown that is not allowing these ranchers to get the help they need right now. And thirdly, we have a blizzard. Well, 2 out of 3 of these are self-inflicted. And think about it. Because there's no farm bill, because there's a government shutdown, some ranchers, Mr. President, really are going to lose everything. Their homes, their land, everything. Because of a freak blizzard in early October. And we can debate the larger issues around that as well. Here's an irony. Those ranchers in South Dakota have 3 days under the law to dispose of their dead cattle. 3 days. They just got hit by a blizzard. They suffered unbelievable losses, and they have 3 days to clean it up. They don't get an extension. They can't kick the can down the road. They can't wait forever either. They can't wait any longer for us to get a farm bill done. This needs to be done right now. If there's a political will to do it, if there's the support from the Speaker to do it, we can get this done quickly. Those cattle ranchers aren't alone, by the way. Producers in the Midwest, the Northwest, the West, much of the South went through one of the worst droughts in a generation last summer. Many producers sold off most of their herds because there just wasn't the grass for the cattle to graze on. Feed was scarce and expensive. As a result, cattle inventories dropped to their lowest levels 5 decades, 50 years. I don't know about you, but for all of us that like to enjoy meat, we're seeing the consequences of the lowest level in 5 decades. Farmers all across the country suffered from this drought. In addition, fruit growers in my state suffered heavy losses last year from an early spring followed by a late frost, and our cherry growers were some of the hardest hit. In fact, they were virtually wiped out. Their crop was wiped out last year. And they also don't have a safety net. Like ranchers, they don't get direct payment subsidies, and they weren't able to get any crop insurance either. We worked hard in this farm bill to make sure that there were risk management tools, not subsidies just because you grow something. We can't afford as taxpayers to do that. It's not the right thing to do. We have a deficit we have to address. Makes no sense. But we worked hard to make sure that the risk management tools, helping farmers and ranchers manage their risk when there was a disaster, like South Dakota, to make those available. But there is no help until we get the Farm Bill signed into law. So for all the men and women, all the families, and the vast majority we're talking about are middle-class families, small farms, medium-sized farms who are working hard from sunrise to sunset, day in and day out, with the riskiest business in the world. They can't kick the can down the road. When the crop is ready to be harvested, they have to do it. They are looking at us and saying, get the job done. Get the Farm Bill done now. All of those middle-class families, all of the 16 million people who work in agriculture, 16 million people who work because of agriculture are saying, we have waited long enough. How many disasters have to happen yet without the right tools before this gets done? 16 million people. Mr. President, the biggest jobs bill we're going to pass this year is a Farm Bill. Rural economic development, energy, food-related industries, our conservation efforts, our help for for people who are caught up in their own personal economic disasters, which is so critical. They are all counting on us. The men and women who are working hard right now to bring in the harvest are counting on us to get this done. They need a farm bill. We did our job. I'm grateful for leaders on both sides of the aisle who came together. That's how I know that we can stop this shutdown, that we can pay our bills, because we've done things together in the United States Senate. We need our colleagues in the House to be willing to step up and do the same. People have waited long enough. It's time to get it done, and it's time to get it done now. Thank you, Mr. President. I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Well, debate continues on the Senate floor this afternoon on the government shutdown as it appears lawmakers are getting closer to a deal. The Associated Press reporting Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell saying that GOP lawmakers are working on trying to come up with a bipartisan solution to the budget stalemate. Returning from a 2-hour meeting at the White House today, he told reporters that the session with President Obama was useful and that he hoped that Senate Republicans could find a way out of the impasse. Senate Republicans have had several private discussions on how to end the partial government shutdown now in its 11th day and avert a catastrophic economic default. The president held discussions with Senate Republicans at the White House this morning. Now, on the debt ceiling talks, it appears progress is being discovered. Here are remarks from Senator Bob Corker from earlier today. Things are beginning to break. Senator Corker, a Tennessee Republican, he said on Political Capital with Al Hunt, which airs on Bloomberg Television, quote, "I'd be surprised if it goes all the way to the 17th. He said, "I think sometime midweek this will all be resolved, if not sooner," candidly. Both the House and the Senate are in session tomorrow. Of course, see the House live on our companion network, C-SPAN, the Senate here on C-SPAN 2. Now, getting underway in just a couple of minutes, we expect today's White House briefing with spokesman Jay Carney. During a quorum call, if senators are not speaking, we will bring that to you live here on C-SPAN 2.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, note the absence of a quorum and ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, well, here we are again. I've been on this floor many, many times over the past 2.5 years that I've been in the Senate, talking about yet another fiscal cliff, another drama, another soap opera playing out before us. American people wondering what in the world is going on down there in Washington. How come we can't get resolution to some of our problems? Why can't we remove this dark cloud of uncertainty about the future of our fiscal future in this country? It is stifling growth. We're growing at an anemic 4 to 5 year rate of less than 1% of growth. That does not put people back to work. That does not solve our unemployment problem. It only makes it worse. That does not revive an economy that even with all the new discoveries in energy and the lower cost of manufacturing, more competitiveness, we have not revived the economy to provide the American people, whether they're just graduating from school with a degree and can't find a job except at maybe a fast food restaurant, or whether they're a middle-aged man or woman who has had their hours cut back or they have been laid off, whether it's a family trying to save for education for their children. This hurts all the way up and down the line. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating for all of us, and particularly frustrating for the people that I represent in Indiana, and I think for all Americans, to watch this dysfunction that's taking place here in Washington, this inability to come together to find a solution to our problems, and this careening from cliff to cliff, debt crisis to debt crisis, people on edge, the market's on edge, up 300 one day and down 250 the next. waiting for any glimmer of hope for some solution, or reacting with gloom and doom for failure to come forward with a solution. And now we have a government shutdown. Now the clock is ticking toward debt limit expiration, and yet we have not come to any resolution or solution for the problem. People are sick and tired of this broken process here in Washington, D.C. I'm sick and tired of it. My colleagues are sick and tired of it. And yet we have not been able to come to find a solution that addresses the problem. I've been talking a lot about, well, let me say this. Republicans just came from a constructive 2-hour meeting at the White House with the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of Treasury. It's a step forward. Now, it's not a Neil Armstrong step forward because it's not a giant leap for mankind. It's a baby step forward. And it's an important first step forward because unless you come to the table to negotiate, unless you are willing to open up where you are in the same room together, sharing your concepts and sharing your thoughts and sharing your concerns, you can't even begin to find a solution. And so this was a step in the right direction. The President had met with House members, Republican members yesterday, and Senate Republican members today. It was about a 2-hour-long meeting, and it was candid, transparent. Most everybody was able to say what was on their mind, to talk about possible solutions. I wish I could say we came out and walked out, stood together, like has been done before in solving these types of problems between presidents and members of leadership on both the House and the Senate. I wish I could say we were able to do that. We weren't. But going from, I will not negotiate, period, don't even bother, even think about it, to let's sit down and at least talk this thing through and see if we can come to a resolution, is a step forward. And so I will take some hope from that. Now, it has been clear, ever since I made that decision in early 2010 to come back to the Senate, to work to try to solve what I thought were some of the most fundamental issues affecting the future of this country that perhaps we've faced in a long, long time, namely this continued deficit spending and plunge into debt, this accumulation of debt that is so jeopardizing our future and our children's future and the future of America. The passage of Obamacare by one party without any bipartisan support, jammed through the Congress by a waiver of the rules, has turned into a nightmare of implementation. It's part of the fiscal problem, and I didn't come here today to talk about that necessarily. I've been here before talking many times about that, what we need to do, what I think we need to do to address our health care problems clearly in a different way than is being addressed by the Affordable Care Act. We see it unfolding before our eyes, yet another Washington dysfunctional piece of legislation. Can't even be implemented, even though the party that passed this has had 3.5 years to implement it. So we hit the date, October 1st, when people can start to enroll, and the systems aren't even up and ready. Now, if this law had been in effect for 6 months or 3 months, you could say, well, they rushed it. It's been 3.5 years, Mr. President. Actually, 3 3/4 years. And they still don't have it right. And there still are major questions. And so that's an issue that we must continue to deal with. We haven't been successful so far because we have not gotten any bipartisan support to make any significant reforms or addressing the overall problem or replacement. That is part of our fiscal issue. And that fiscal issue is eating up the promise of America that has been given to every generation in the history of this country and stands ready to be denied to the next generation and succeeding generations because of our inability to summon the political will to do what we all know we need to do. We cannot keep spending more than we take in. We cannot keep borrowing money to cover that difference. We have seen in just this last 4.5 years of this administration a staggering increase in the amount of debt we've accumulated, from just a little over $10 trillion to now $17 trillion in just the space of one administration, with 3 more years to go. It is unsustainable, and I doubt that there's a member of this body, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, that could simply ignore and say, this is not a problem. It's a huge problem. And every day, every week, every month, every year we postpone it, the problem becomes worse. We have made effort after effort after effort. Bipartisan efforts, Simpson-Bowles, Domenici-Rivlin, laying out plans as to how to address this over a period of time to put us on a path to solvency. The Gang of Six, all the efforts of a Republican, Saxby Chambliss, and a Democrat, Mark Warner, and those of us who supported those efforts to try to find a way to solve this problem. The super committee, the dinner group, which I was part of, substantive discussions with the White House, with the Chief of Staff, with the President himself, over a 7-month period of time. Unable to reach a resolution, unable to even come to the conclusion that this problem is so great it needs to be dealt with now, not pushed down later, not for some other administration. We've had too many Congresses and too many administrations simply saying, can't get it done, we'll have to push it off for yet another term, yet another election, yet another president. Well, time is running out. So despite all these efforts, we have failed. And in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most, the reason why we have failed, because we have failed to achieve presidential leadership. The kinds of changes that are needed to address a problem this large, to bring parties together, to put us in a position where we are willing to risk our careers, where we are willing to stand up and do what is right for America regardless of the political consequences, willing to stand together, Republican and Democrat, and basically say this problem transcends politics, not use it against each other, but stand there together and say this problem is of such magnitude that we have to stand together, have the will to go forward. That can only be accomplished, and only has been accomplished, if you look to past history, by presidential leadership. I was privileged to be here as a member of the House of Representatives when we faced not as great a problem, but a significant problem with entitlement spending, in this case Social Security. The trust fund was running dry. The case was made to the American people. A Republican president reached out to a Democrat Speaker of the House of Representatives. A divided government, Democrats in one house, Republicans in the other, reached out and said, we've got a problem and it can only be solved if the two of us will stand together on a bipartisan way. And that they did. And it wasn't easy, but it was successful. And through it we made a substantial, meaningful change to our Social Security system, which brought about 35 years of insolvency. Now we face an even more dire crisis than that. But the solution will be the same, and that is we need to have presidential leadership. I proposed a number of things. It looks like we're going to be limited. I did not get any indication from the president that he's willing to take these kinds of risks, to so-called go big. Mr. President, I would ask, I'm about to finish, and I know my colleague is waiting. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to speak for 3 more minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm not going to wait to speak, but Mr. President, if I might ask the distinguished senator from Indiana a question, and then certainly to agree however much time he wants.
Would the senator yield for a question?
I would be happy to yield to my friend.
The senator from Indiana is very sincere, as he has worked diligently and in a bipartisan way to tackle this budget problem. And it is this senator's hope that we can continue those kind of discussions that we had a couple of years ago. Would the senator agree that the shutdown situation that we find ourselves in, however, which started for a different reason than the budget questions, it started for the reason of people wanting to defund Obamacare, that shutdown creates a crisis atmosphere in which it's very difficult to have those budgetary discussions that the senator yearns to have, as does his colleague from Florida.
Well, Mr. President, I answered to my friend from Florida who did work with a group of us, Democrats and Republicans, in past efforts to address the larger question which I'm addressing here. I know he's as disappointed as I am that we were not able to come to a resolution. Republicans don't want a shutdown. We want a solution. We have found in the past that the leverage of a financial situation often gives us the opportunity to raise the issues and hopefully reach at least a partial solution, and that has happened in the past. But I stand with those who simply say, I want to find a solution to the larger problem, including the shutdown of the government. And I was focusing my efforts on the debt limit that we're reaching because it's very hard to make a case for asking the American people for yet another $1 trillion of debt loaded on their shoulders without some efforts to address why this debt is being accumulated and why it continues to go forward. And why hasn't the Congress stepped up to address this spending? It's like having a credit card and the bank calls and said, you've hit your limit. And you've asked us several times in the past to raise that limit, and we've done so. But you keep reaching the limit and you keep asking for more credit. And at what point are you going to amend your reckless spending so that you don't have to keep coming in here and we don't have to keep giving you more credit? How do we know you're ever going to pay this back? How do we know that you're not going to just declare bankruptcy, insolvency, because you've hit the point where you simply don't have the means to pay this back? So look, we might be willing to give you some increase in your credit, but you've got to give us something back first. And that is, you've got to get off your addiction of spending that keeps driving us into this situation. So what I was trying to address here is, yes, a solution to get this government back to work, combined, hopefully, with a renewed effort by the senator from Florida and myself and others to strip out the unnecessary spending, the duplication, the egregious misuse of taxpayers' dollars for non-essential functions of this federal government. There's no disagreement between how we need to fund our national security. There's no disagreement about some of the essential cancer research and a number of other things that this government engages in that can't be handled at the state level, can't be handled at a private level substantially. But there's a lot of concern about excess spending that continues to push us more and more into debt. So in answer to my friend's question, I would simply say that Republicans don't like this shutdown any more than Democrats. And we want to, but what we want to do is have some solution to the underlying problem. And the underlying problem is the merger of not only excessive spending, but the debt limit that is the result of that spending. Now, I know my time is rapidly running off down to zero here, so let me just conclude by saying this. I believe we have a duty to the American taxpayer, but beyond that, a duty to the future of this country, which is not just our children and grandchildren, but everybody's children and grandchildren, all the generations that come. We have a duty and a moral responsibility not to so laden them with debt that they will not have the opportunities that many of us have enjoyed. Simple opportunities of owning a home, saving money for our kids so we can send them to and give them a good education, getting the bills paid on time, living the American dream, which is not to become a millionaire or billionaire, maybe for some, but for most it's just to live a quiet, normal, peaceful life, passing on those values and giving our children those opportunities that we have found for ourselves. And I suggest that until we summon the political will to do so, and until, frankly, we have a president that has that same will, we won't solve that problem. I'll conclude with this. It's a story, maybe you've heard it before. Man walks into the doctor's office, says, "I don't feel well at all." The doctor gives him all the tests and all the exams and calls him back in and said, "Well, the disease you have is terminal. It's going to kill you." There's two ways to address this. There is a cure. It has some pain attached to it. You can't just ignore it. But if you will agree to this medicine we're going to give you and these procedures, we can save your life. If you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to have the will to go through that process, to get you back to health, there's another alternative. And that alternative is we can transplant that disease into your children and into your grandchildren, and then let them deal with it. And that is exactly what we're doing here, by not having and summoning the will to do the things that we all know need to be done to prevent this country from becoming insolvent, for denying and destroying the American dream. The future of this country rests with our decisions, and to date, we have not made those decisions. With that, Mr. President, I'll yield the floor.
The senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I see the great junior senator of Virginia waiting to speak here, and I just want to make a quick statement. I again want to remind the Senate and anybody who's listening what brought about the shutdown. It's been going on now for a week and a half, and we don't see any relief in sight. And what started the whole thing on the shutdown is shut down the government unless you agree to reverse a law that was passed and declared constitutional by the Supreme Court. By reversing that law, by taking the funding away from the Affordable Care Act. Now, that's what started it a week and a half ago. And, Mr. President, I have just come from the Commerce Committee where Senator Rockefeller has had a hearing on everything from the Consumer Finance and the Consumer Federation on how consumers are not being protected, everything to the National Transportation Safety Board, how all of these accidents that have occurred within the last week and a half of the shutdown, they can't get investigated because all of their staff is on furlough, to the aerospace industry, They can't deliver airplanes that are ready for delivery because they have to have their final FAA certificate. To, of course, the space program in NASA and 97% furloughed to over 60% of NOAA furloughed, and all of the weather satellites that we're trying to get going that are all, and then you take all of these government employees that are furloughed. What about all the contractors to the government that are now laying off all the contractors? We had an Alaskan captain talking about he needs the government certificates so that he can go to sea on the Alaskan crab catch. He can't get that. Guess who's lurking out there? Russian captains to come in and start supplying the world market, including the domestic U.S. market, with crab. You can go through the whole thing. And then, of course, the other side says, in the midst of the shutdown, now with a default on the credit rating of the government facing us, you're not negotiating. That reminds me of the story, Mr. President. Two people are talking. One says, can I burn your house down? The other one says, no. Can I burn your second floor down? No. Can I burn your garage down? No. How about your utility room? No. Oh, you won't compromise. You can't compromise over something that is hurting so many people's lives and is threatening the security and safety of people's lives. You can't compromise on that. You can't compromise on this nation going into financial default. Come on, let's use a little common sense and get back into government functioning again and stop the nonsense about threatening a default of this country. And then let's do what the very sincere senator from Indiana has said. Let's continue those discussions about what we can do for the long-term financial integrity of this country. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I thank the senator from Virginia for his indulgence.
Mr. President.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I rise to deliver